snow fell the way old stories do, soft at first, then heavy enough to make the world forget its shape, until only white remained to tell of what once stood beneath it. Through that storm rode Rowan McAllister, age 30, a cowboy with eyes that had learned to find truth even in the darkest corners of the plains, his horse breathing steam into the cold air as if exhaling memories he had not asked to carry. Rowan had ridden these frozen trails for years, but never had the night felt so uneasy, so expectant, as though the land itself held its breath for something unnamed yet urgently waiting. He leaned forward in the saddle, scanning the swirling white for any sign of life, sensing somehow that the snow hid more than weather beneath its silence, and the weight of that feeling tightened its grip with every passing hoof-beat. It was then he saw her, Winona Skyfeather, age 21, collapsed where the snow drifted deepest, her dark hair tangled with frost, her breath barely visible in the storm's hollow light, a figure carved from suffering and resilience all at once. Her skin was cold when he lifted her, fragile as a winter-blown leaf, yet there was a strength in her stillness that struck him harder than the wind. In her half-conscious eyes there was a quiet defiance, as though she had survived more winters than she deserved to endure, and even now refused to surrender entirely. Rowan wrapped his long coat around her trembling form, kneeling in the storm with a tenderness that surprised even him, whispering, "Come home with me, if you trust me," though he wasn't sure if she heard him through the roar of the wind, or if his words were swallowed by the night before they could truly reach her. Her fingers twitched at his voice, just barely, just enough for hope to bloom like a spark in the dark, and Rowan felt that faint motion echo straight into his own chest. He lifted her, cradling her against him as though she were something sacred, something he feared the world might break again if he did not shield her carefully enough. Snow clung to them both, settling on their hair and shoulders as he placed her onto his horse, climbing behind her to hold her upright on the saddle. The storm snarled around them, but he pressed forward toward the dim lantern glow of Silver Ash, a small mountain town carved out of ice and stubbornness, praying she would stay warm enough to greet the morning. Yet as the first rooftops came into view, Rowan felt a tension rise inside him, sensing that the town's lights would not welcome them both equally. Silver Ash lay quiet as Rowan led his horse down its snowy main street, but shuttered windows cracked open just enough for wary eyes to peer out. Whispers traveled faster than the wind, suspicion, prejudice, old grudges disguised as caution. By the time he reached the sheriff's office, half the town had gathered, their faces lit by lantern flame and fear. Sheriff Clayton Reeves stepped forward, his jaw sharp as a blade and his voice carrying the judgment of a man who had forgotten the weight of mercy. "You can't bring her here, Rowan," he said, nodding toward Winona's unconscious form. "We don't need trouble in Silver Ash." Rowan felt anger stir, not hot but steady like coals that refuse to die, and he tightened his hold around Winona as though daring anyone to reach for her. He met the sheriff's stare in silence, the cold between them sharpening, until Rowan turned away without permission, carrying her toward his cabin with a quiet defiance that spoke louder than any shouted protest. Inside the cabin, warmth flickered weakly from a lonely fire, but it was enough. Rowan laid Winona gently onto his bed, removing her wet boots and wrapping her in blankets that smelled faintly of pine and solitude. He worked carefully, heating broth, layering wood onto the fire, speaking to her in murmurs meant to guide her back from whatever far-off place her mind drifted toward. When she finally blinked awake, her dark eyes shone with confusion, fear, and the ghost of gratitude, all tangled together. He introduced himself softly, telling her she was safe, though he suspected safety was a word she had not believed in for a long time. She whispered her name, Winona Skyfeather, her voice fragile yet shaped by quiet strength. Their gazes held for a long, unbroken moment, and Rowan felt something shift within him like thawing ice, a sense that caring for her was not a choice, but something inevitable. But before he could say more, the crunch of footsteps outside the cabin warned that the town had not let them be. 3 men stood outside when Rowan opened the door, bundled in thick coats and louder judgment. They accused him of inviting danger, of risking the town's peace, of harboring someone who didn't belong. Their words were heavy with fear they believed to be righteousness, and Rowan listened without blinking, waiting for their anger to run dry. When the sheriff stepped forward again, his hand resting near his holster as though intimidation might win where reason failed, Rowan only said, "She stays." Nothing more, nothing less. His tone carried a quiet resolve that unsettled them more than any threat ever could, and one by one, they backed away into the storm. Inside, Winona had heard everything. Her gaze followed him with new softness when he returned, her face illuminated by the firelight as though she were seeing him clearly for the first time. Yet even as warmth grew between them, she sensed danger lingering just outside, ready to strike when least expected. The next dawn arrived pale and fragile, brushing the snow with muted gold. Rowan left early, needing supplies to help Winona regain her strength. Bandages, herbs, lumber for repairs the storm had forced upon his old cabin. He promised her he would return before the sun reached its highest point, and though her voice was soft when she answered, her eyes followed him with a hesitation that felt like a warning she could not yet name. Winona moved slowly about the cabin, humming a song from her childhood, tending the fire as though weaving warmth into the air itself. But peace lasted only until a sudden bang rattled the door and 3 ranchers stormed inside, their faces hidden beneath fur-lined hats, their intentions sharp and cruel. They seized Winona before she could flee, binding her wrists, dragging her into the snow as she struggled against them with growing desperation. From a distance, Sheriff Reeves watched their retreat, not stopping them, not helping her, only turning away with a guilt he refused to acknowledge. Winona screamed Rowan's name into the wind, but the storm swallowed her voice whole. Rowan returned to a quiet cabin, a dangerous kind of quiet, and the moment he stepped inside, dread clenched around his heart like a fist. Blankets cast aside, a broken cup on the floor, footprints leading away into the storm. He called for Winona, his voice cracking through the cold air, but only silence answered. Panic surged through him, not frantic, but sharp, focused, the kind that came from knowing someone precious was in danger. He raced into town, demanding answers from anyone who dared meet his eyes, but fear sealed their lips shut. When he finally confronted the sheriff, Rowan's voice shook, not from weakness, but from a fury that lived deep and steady in his bones. Reeves shrugged, claiming ignorance, his lie obvious in the twitch of his jaw. Rowan stepped back, realization settling heavy on him. Silver ash would not help him find Winona. So he mounted his horse, refusing to waste another second, and followed the faintest trace of tracks leading out into the vast, unforgiving snow. Night thickened as Rowan followed the footprints through the forest, lit only by pale starlight trembling behind the storm's thinning veil. He rode harder than he ever had, his breath turning ragged, his knuckles white against the reins, his thoughts repeating her name like prayer and promise both. In the distance, a line of smoke crept upward between the trees, a thin, wavering signal barely visible against the swirling sky. He pressed forward, urging his tired horse with gentle desperation. When he reached the abandoned shed, he saw dim firelight leaking through cracks in the boards. He dismounted silently, jaw set, heart pounding, and pushed the door open with a strength born not of muscle, but of fear he refused to bow to. What he found inside made every second of searching sharpen into clarity. Winona was tied to a chair, her face bruised, her breath trembling but unbroken. The ranchers stood over her, arguing about what to do next, unaware of Rowan until he stepped into the firelight with a quiet that made them freeze. The room didn't erupt into chaos. It fell into a tension so sharp it felt like the air held its own blade. Rowan moved with deliberate restraint, untying Winona's wrists even as the ranchers watched him in stunned silence, unsure if facing him was worth the risk. Winona fell forward into his arms, burying her face against his chest, her body still shaking from cold and fear. Rowan cradled her face, pressing his forehead to hers as though grounding his soul in hers, whispering, "Just thinking about being away from you takes my breath away." Winona's tears warmed his skin as she whispered back that she loved him, her voice trembling with truth she could no longer hide. With her arms wrapped around him, Rowan led her out of the shed, leaving the ranchers behind like shadows without power, guiding her toward the faint lights of silver ash once more. They reached the center of town just as lanterns flickered awake along the snowy street. People gathered quickly, drawn by the sight of Rowan holding Winona close, his jaw set with a resolve none dared challenge. Without hesitation, Rowan announced to the crowd, "I'm marrying her. Today." His voice rang clear through the cold, leaving no room for argument. A pastor stepped forward, moved by something in Rowan's tone, and spoke the vows in the falling snow. Winona's hands trembled in Rowan's, but her gaze held steady, warmed by a love she had finally found a place to rest in. When the pastor pronounced them, Rowan kissed her gently, reverently, as though sealing a promise crafted long before this moment. The crowd murmured, some shocked, some softened, but before their emotions could settle, a plume of smoke rose over the trees toward Rowan's cabin, dark and angry against the pale sky. The cabin was already half engulfed when they reached it, flames roaring through the wooden walls with a hunger winter could not tame. Rowan grabbed buckets of snow and water, fighting the blaze with frantic determination, while Winona ran along the burning side of the house where faint screams echoed from within. Without hesitation, she plunged through the smoke-filled doorway, emerging moments later with a young girl coughing in her arms. The girl's terrified eyes widened when she recognized Winona's face, and as Rowan helped wrap her in blankets, the sheriff arrived at a run. "Lily!" he cried, falling to his knees beside his daughter. His gaze lifted to Winona, his shock twisting into shame as he realized the woman he had scorned had saved what he loved most. With a trembling voice, he apologized to them both, vowing to arrest the rancher responsible for the arson and any who had aided him. Rowan nodded but said nothing, his focus entirely on Winona, who stood illuminated by firelight like a testament to courage far greater than anyone had imagined. By nightfall, the flames had been tamed, leaving behind a half-burned cabin standing like a wounded survivor under the moon. The townspeople drifted away with heavy hearts, carrying new understanding in their silence, until only Rowan and Winona remained on the porch, breathing in the lingering smoke and cold. Winona draped her warm shawl around them both, leaning her head against Rowan's shoulder as he wrapped an arm around her waist. Their foreheads touched once more, a gesture now rich with history, fear, survival, longing, and newfound belonging woven into one tender moment. Rowan kissed her slowly, the soft kind that asked nothing and promised everything, and she whispered that they would rebuild stronger than before. The night settled around them like a blessing, broken but hopeful, fragile yet resilient, and Rowan held her tighter as though anchoring them both to the future they had chosen together. Morning arrived with a surprising warmth, pale sunlight reflecting off the snow as if the world wished to help them begin again. Rowan and Winona worked side by side, repairing beams, replacing boards, brushing soot from whatever remained untouched by the flames. To their astonishment, townspeople soon arrived with lumber, nails, food, and quiet gratitude, offering help without expectation. Winona's bravery had softened hearts that once turned cold toward her, and in the shared labor, something unspoken healed between them all. By midday, the cabin stood stronger, still scarred, but renewed, its porch decorated with fresh flowers, evergreen branches, and small potted plants Winona arranged with delicate care. When the sheriff returned, it was with news that the rancher responsible for burning their home had been arrested. Rowan simply nodded, but Winona thanked him gently, her voice carrying a grace that humbled him deeply. That night, with the cabin warm and whole again, Rowan and Winona lay together beside a crackling fire, wrapped in blankets and each other's arms. Their breaths mingled softly, the rhythm slow and steady, matching the peace lingering in the air. Rowan traced small patterns along Winona's hand, memorizing every line as though learning a sacred map. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the heartbeat that had once guided her through the forest like a lantern. They spoke of the life they would build, gardens blooming in spring, children laughing in the tall grass, quiet nights filled with stories and the soft glow of the hearth. Snow drifted against the windows like a lullaby, and in that gentle hush, they drifted into sleep, wrapped in warmth that no winter could ever take from them. And if you are listening, dear reader, let me tell you this in the soft voice of someone who has seen winters both outside and within the heart. Love does not always arrive loudly, nor does it always come dressed in certainty. Sometimes it appears collapsed in the snow, fragile as a whisper, waiting for someone brave enough to lift it from the cold. Sometimes the world will judge you for choosing compassion, but the world is small compared to the home we build with those who understand us. So may you find someone who looks at you the way Rowan looked at Winona, like you are the warmest fire in the longest winter, and may your own storms part just long enough for grace to step through.